a crowded New Orleans jazz club at night, warm amber and neon lighting reflecting off wet cobblestone streets visible through the open doorway. A live jazz band frozen mid-performance on stage. In the foreground, a tall Korean man in a dark minimalist coat stands still near the back wall as a black woman in a deep blue velvet dress suddenly hugs him tightly, her cheek pressed to his chest, eyes tense but controlled. Background patrons blur into silhouettes, one man near the bar watching them sharply with suspicion. The mood is quiet danger, improvised intimacy, restrained tension, cinematic lighting, shallow depth of field, emotional realism. New Orleans had a way of making strangers feel like unfinished stories. The jazz club sat on a narrow street in the French Quarter, its doorway glowing amber against the wet pavement. Inside, the air was thick with brass, sweat, and low laughter, the kind that came from people who believed the night still owed them something. Zyron Kwon stood near the back wall, untouched drink in hand, posture relaxed but eyes calculating. He didn't come to clubs for pleasure. He came to observe. Patterns, faces, exits. Music was background noise. Control was the point. Then someone stepped directly into his space. The impact was light, almost careful but intentional. Before Zyron could react, warm arms wrapped around his torso. A woman pressed her cheek against his chest, her breath quick, uneven. "Please," she whispered, so softly only he could hear. "Pretend you know me." Zyron didn't move. Her scent was clean, citrus and rain, not drunk, not reckless, just afraid enough to gamble. A beat passed. Then Zyron lifted his arm and placed it firmly around her back. "Baby," he said calmly, voice low and convincing, "you said you'd meet me inside." Her shoulders loosened slightly, like she'd just stepped off a ledge. From the corner of his eye, Zyron caught movement. A man near the bar stiffened when he saw them together. The man's gaze lingered too long, sharp with recognition and irritation. "Is that him?" Zyron murmured. "Yes," the woman said. "He thinks I owe him something." Zyron adjusted his stance, angling his body so it subtly blocked the man's line of sight. No threats, no confrontation. Presence was enough. The band hit a loud crescendo. The man at the bar turned away, muttered something to the bartender, and left without finishing his drink. Only then did the woman pull back. Her eyes met Zyron's, dark, alert, unapologetic. "Thank you," she said. "I'm alone." Zyron nodded once. "You're safe now." She studied him for a moment longer than necessary, then smiled, small, knowing. "I figured." She walked away before he could ask anything else. Zyron didn't follow. But for the rest of the night, the music sounded different. Cliffhanger. Zyron told himself it was coincidence. He told himself it meant nothing. But 2 days later, when he heard her voice echoing through a community hall, angry, composed, unforgettable, he realized the night hadn't let him go. Zyron Kwon had built his life on restraint. As a Korean immigrant who arrived in the U.S. with no safety net and no tolerance for chaos, he learned early that attention was expensive. Silence, on the other hand, could be leveraged. By 38, he ran a logistics firm that specialized in discrete problem-solving. Contracts were clean. Outcomes were not always public. That balance kept him powerful and invisible. So when he walked into the Treme Civic Center and heard Aloan Cade speaking at the podium, his first instinct was to leave. Her voice cut through the room. "This building doesn't belong to investors," she said, gesturing toward a faded blueprint of Crescent Hall. "It belongs to the culture that created it. Once it's gone, you don't get it back." Applause followed. Zyron stayed. He listened as she dismantled the development proposal piece by piece, his proposal. Not emotionally, intelligently, with facts he hadn't expected her to have. After the meeting, she spotted him immediately. "You," she said, walking up to him. "You were at the club." "You hugged me," Zyron replied calmly. Her lips pressed together, "Because I had too." "And now?" he asked. "Now I'm telling you Crescent Hall isn't for sale. Zyron leaned closer. It already is. The silence between them thickened. You don't even know what it means, she said. I know what it costs, he replied. They parted without resolution. That night, Zyron rerouted funds meant for demolition into structural reinforcement instead. Quietly, without approval. He didn't tell Elowen. Not yet. Cliffhanger. Elowen thought Zyron was her enemy. Zyron thought secrecy would protect them both. Neither realized the storm coming would force everything into the open. Elowen Cade had spent her career rescuing sounds before they disappeared. Old recordings, forgotten voices, songs that survived only because someone cared enough to press record. Crescent Hall wasn't just a building, it was proof that Black history didn't need permission to exist. That was why Zyron terrified her. Not because he was cruel. Because he was quiet. Quiet men erase things without raising their voices. When the storm hit New Orleans, Elowen rushed to Crescent Hall with musicians and volunteers. Rain flooded the street. Wind rattled the windows. The roof groaned. Then Zyron arrived, with engineers. What are you doing here? She demanded. Protecting an asset, he said. No, she snapped. Protecting control. They argued under flickering lights, while rain poured through the ceiling. Finally, Zyron stopped. What do you need? He asked. Not slogans, not speeches, what do you need? Elowen stared at him, soaked, shaking. Truth, she said, and partnership. Zyron knew that was the one thing he'd never offered anyone. Cliffhanger. If Zyron chose silence, Crescent Hall would survive, but Elowen would walk away forever. If he chose truth, everything he built could unravel. The storm passed, but it left something unsettled behind. Crescent Hall smelled like wet wood and old electricity. Buckets lined the floor. Volunteers moved quietly, exhausted but relieved. Outside, sirens faded into the distance like the city exhaling. Elowen stood near the stage, arms folded tight against her chest. Zyron watched her from across the room, aware that this moment mattered more than any contract he'd ever signed. You asked for truth, Zyron said finally. That comes with conditions. She turned to face him. I'm listening. I didn't buy Crescent Hall to destroy it, he said. I bought it to keep it out of the wrong hands. Elowen laughed once, sharp, disbelieving. You expect me to trust that? No, Zyron replied. I expect you to verify it. He pulled out a folder, not digital, not flashy. Paper, receipts, structural reports. Quiet rerouted payments dated weeks before the public proposal. Elowen scanned them slowly. Her expression shifted, not to relief, but to confusion. Why hide this? She asked. Because visibility attracts interference, Zyron said. And interference attracts people who don't care about music or history. She closed the folder. So you decided alone what was worth saving, she said. That's not protection, that's control. Zyron didn't deny it. You're right, he said. That's my flaw. The honesty surprised her more than the documents. What are you offering? Elowen asked. A partnership, Zyron said. You lead the cultural trust. Public-facing, transparent, I stay in the background. And ownership. I step down. The words landed heavy between them. Elowen searched his face for calculation, but found only resolve, and something like fear. You don't even know me, she said. I know what you refuse to compromise, Zyron replied. That's rare. She looked toward the musicians packing up their instruments, toward the hall that had survived another night. Fine, she said, but no secrecy between us. Zyron nodded, agreed. They shook hands, not as saviors or saveds, but as equals stepping into uncertainty. Cliffhanger. Neither of them noticed the man watching from across the street. Until the first anonymous email hit Elowen's inbox the next morning. The email was short. You don't know who you're working with. No signature, no threat, just implication. Elowen stared at her screen longer than she wanted to admit. She didn't tell Zyron right away, not because she didn't trust him, but because she needed to understand the shape of the danger first. Instead, she did what she always did. She listened. Over the next week, Crescent Hall filled with sound again. Rehearsals, conversations, stories recorded in corners and stairwells. Elowen documented everything, not just music but testimony. Then a pattern emerged. Old donors withdrawing support, permit delays, anonymous complaints filed with the city. Someone was trying to suffocate the project quietly. When Elowen finally showed Zyron the emails, he didn't look surprised. "They're probing," he said, "seeing if pressure works." "From who?" she asked. Zyron hesitated. "My past isn't violent," he said carefully, "but it's complicated." "Complicated enough to risk this?" Elowen asked. "Yes." That night, she made a decision he hadn't anticipated. At a public forum streamed online, Elowen played an unreleased recording, an interview with a late jazz musician who had once been pushed out of Crescent Hall by predatory buyers decades earlier. His voice filled the room. "They don't need guns," the recording said. "They just wait you out." The message was unmistakable. The crowd reacted immediately. Media attention followed. Crescent Hall stopped being quiet. Zyron watched from the back, realizing too late what visibility had cost them. Afterward, Elowen found him outside. "I know this scares you," she said, "but silence was already killing it." Zyron nodded slowly. "You're right," he said, "but now we're exposed." Cliffhanger. That night, Zyron received a call he hadn't heard in years. From someone who knew exactly how to dismantle him without touching Crescent Hall at all. The caller didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "New Orleans is loud," the man said. "You were safer when you were." Zyron ended the call without responding. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, things escalated, not violently, but surgically. Zyron's firm lost 2 major clients within hours. A regulatory audit appeared out of nowhere. Nothing illegal, just enough friction to slow everything down. Elowen noticed immediately. "You okay?" she asked when he missed a meeting. "I miscalculated," Zyron admitted. "Visibility costs more than I remembered." She sat beside him on the steps of Crescent Hall. "Then walk away," she said. "I won't blame you." Zyron looked at the building, at the musicians arriving, at the city pressing in. "No," he said, "this time I stay." That decision fractured something old inside him and rebuilt something new. Together, they went public with the trust structure, shared authority, community governance, no single owner. It was risky, it was irreversible. And it worked. Donations returned, volunteers doubled. The city reversed its delays. Pressure shifted away from Crescent Hall and squarely onto Zyron. He accepted it. On opening night weeks later, Zyron stood in the back again. Elowen took the stage, not to speak but to listen. Music rose, the hall breathed. Elowen found Zyron afterward, smiling through exhaustion. "You stayed," she said. "So did you," he replied. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. Cliffhanger. The hall was saved. But Zyron's past wasn't finished collecting its debt. And the city was about to choose which version of him it believed. The night Crescent Hall officially reopened, the city showed up like it had something to prove. The line wrapped around the block, musicians, elders, students, reporters, and people who didn't usually stand in lines unless the moment mattered. Cameras hovered, but this time they weren't searching for scandal. They were waiting for meaning. Zyron arrived alone. No entourage, no tailored statement, just a dark coat and a quiet presence near the back of the room. He had already resigned from 2 boards earlier that day. The final audit on his company was still unresolved. He knew the cost of tonight would not be symbolic, it would be personal. Elowen stood near the stage, hands folded, breathing slow. She wasn't nervous about speaking. She was nervous about what the city might decide to remember. When the first note rang out, the room changed. Music does that. It rearranges power. The performance wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. Each sound carried weight, like testimony. The audience leaned in, listening the way people do when they realize they're part of something that won't repeat itself. Midway through the night, the unexpected happened. A city council member stood. Then another. They weren't scheduled to speak. No announcement followed. But their presence alone sent a message. Crescent Hall was no longer invisible. Applause spread, not loud but sustained. Zyron felt it then, the shift. Not victory, something heavier, something permanent. Eloin met his eyes across the room. He nodded once. After the final song, Eloin stepped forward, not to thank sponsors, not to claim credit, but to do something far riskier. This space, she said, exists because people chose to share power instead of hoard it. Her gaze flicked briefly toward Zyron, then back to the crowd. There are names you won't hear tonight. That's intentional. Murmurs followed, curiosity sparked, but no accusations landed. Later outside, a reporter finally cornered Zyron. Are you the owner of Crescent Hall? Zyron paused. No, he said. I'm accountable to it. The answer made headlines. Cliffhanger. The city embraced Crescent Hall. But the next morning, Zyron woke to find his name trending for reasons that had nothing to do with music. The article dropped before sunrise. Not defamatory, not false, just selective. It detailed Zyron's past business dealings, stripped of context, framed as shadowy and suspect. Nothing illegal, nothing provable, just enough to invite doubt. By noon, donors hesitated. By evening, Eloin's inbox flooded with questions she couldn't ignore. She found Zyron sitting alone in Crescent Hall, lights off, hands clasped. I should step away, he said before she could speak. For good. Eloin sat across from him. Is that what you want? She asked. Or what you're used to doing when things get hard? Zyron didn't answer immediately. I don't want this to cost you, he said. It already has, she replied softly. But that doesn't mean I regret it. Silence settled between them, not tense but honest. I built my life on being necessary but unseen, Zyron said. This being known feels reckless. Eloin nodded. For me, being unseen was never a choice. They sat with that difference, neither trying to fix it. Then Eloin made a decision. The next day, she addressed the trust publicly. She didn't defend Zyron. She contextualized him. She spoke about power that steps back, about accountability without spectacle, about partnerships that don't look romantic or heroic, but endure. The response was mixed. Some supporters left. Others doubled down. Zyron watched it all, knowing this was the moment where people decided whether he was worth the discomfort. That night, he stood outside Eloin's apartment for nearly 10 minutes before knocking. I won't disappear, he said when she opened the door, but I won't ask you to carry this either. Eloin studied him. Then stay, she said, not as a shield, as a choice. He nodded. Cliffhanger. They stood together in uncertainty, not knowing whether the city would accept that kind of quiet partnership or demand a sacrifice. Time did what it always does when people stop forcing it. The controversy faded, not erased, but absorbed into something larger. Crescent Hall continued to host music, dialogue, and history. The trust expanded. Governance rotated. Decisions were shared. Zyron downsized his firm, took fewer contracts, lost influence he once guarded fiercely, and gained something steadier in its place. Eloin published her archive. It didn't center heroes. It centered continuity. They never announced themselves as anything. They simply became undeniable. 1 year later, Crescent Hall hosted its anniversary performance. No speeches, no press release, just sound and presence. Zyron stood beside Eloin this time, not behind her. When the final song ended, she reached for his hand. No audience reaction followed, no announcement, just a simple truth settling into place. Later, on the empty stage, Eloan sat with her feet dangling, Zyron beside her. "Do you miss the way things were?" she asked. Zyron considered the question carefully. "I miss certainty," he said, "but I don't miss isolation." She smiled. "That might be the most honest thing you've said." He smiled back. In that moment, success didn't look like headlines or vindication. It looked like choice. Crescent Hall remained, not frozen in the past, not sold to the future, but alive. And so did they. Final resolution. Not rescued. Not redeemed. But chosen, by each other, and by the city that finally learned